The year was 1962, and the world was at the height of the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union, two superpowers locked in a bitter ideological struggle, had spent more than a decade building up vast nuclear arsenals. But in October of that year, the world came closer than ever before to nuclear annihilation. The Cuban Missile Crisis, a tense 13-day standoff between the US and the Soviet Union, was a confrontation that brought humanity to the edge of disaster. This is the story of the Cuban Missile Crisis, how it began, how it unfolded, and how, in the end, cooler heads prevailed. To understand the Cuban Missile Crisis, we must first understand the world in which it took place. The Cold War was a time of intense rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union, a conflict that was as much about ideology as it was about power. The United States championed capitalism and democracy, while the Soviet Union represented communism and state control. Both sides feared and mistrusted the other, leading to a race to develop more powerful nuclear weapons. By the late 1950s, the arms race between the two nations had reached dangerous new heights. Both the United States and the Soviet Union had enough nuclear weapons to destroy the planet several times over. This terrifying reality set the stage for one of the most perilous moments in modern history. Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of Florida, became a focal point in the Cold War after the Cuban Revolution of 1959. Fidel Castro, a charismatic revolutionary, overthrew the US-backed dictator Fulgencio Batista and established a communist government. Almost immediately, relations between the United States and Cuba soured. The US imposed a trade embargo, and in response, Castro sought support from the Soviet Union. Khrushchev saw an opportunity in Cuba. Not only could the Soviet Union gain a foothold in the Western Hemisphere, but it could also challenge the United States in its own backyard. The relationship between Cuba and the Soviet Union grew closer, and soon a plan was set in motion that would bring the world to the brink of nuclear war. In October 1962, American U-2 spy planes flying over Cuba captured a series of images that would send shockwaves through Washington. The photographs reveal something alarming: Soviet missile sites under construction, just 90 miles from the US mainland. These were not ordinary missiles. They were medium and intermediate-range nuclear missiles capable of reaching major American cities within minutes. President Kennedy convened a special group of advisors known as the Executive Committee of the National Security Council (XCOMM) to discuss the crisis. The options were laid out. Some argued for an immediate military strike to destroy the missile sites, while others advocated for diplomacy and a naval blockade to prevent further missiles from reaching Cuba. The stakes could not have been higher. A military strike could provoke the Soviet Union into retaliation, potentially leading to World War III. But doing nothing was not an option either. The missiles in Cuba represented a direct threat to American national security. On October 22, 1962, Kennedy announced to the world that the United States was imposing a naval quarantine on Cuba. The goal was to prevent any further Soviet missile shipments from reaching the island. As American warships moved into position, the world held its breath. Would the Soviet Union challenge the blockade, leading to a direct confrontation at sea? While the world watched the naval standoff, behind the scenes, frantic diplomatic efforts were underway. Robert F. Kennedy met privately with Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin, delivering a clear message. The United States would not tolerate Soviet missiles in Cuba, and failure to resolve the crisis peacefully could lead to catastrophic consequences. Premier Khrushchev faced immense pressure as well. While he had hoped to strengthen the Soviet position by placing missiles in Cuba, he now found himself in a dangerous game of brinkmanship. Both he and Kennedy knew that the first nation to back down risked appearing weak, but neither could afford to trigger a global nuclear war. On October 27, 1962, as the world seemed on the verge of catastrophe, a secret deal was struck. Khrushchev sent a message to Kennedy, offering a way out of the crisis. The Soviets would remove their missiles from Cuba if the United States publicly promised not to invade the island. In addition, Kennedy quietly agreed to remove American missiles stationed in Turkey, a key Soviet concern. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a watershed moment in the Cold War. For 13 days, the world stood on the brink of nuclear disaster, but diplomacy and backchannel negotiations ultimately averted catastrophe. Both Kennedy and Khrushchev emerged from the crisis with a renewed understanding of the dangers of nuclear brinkmanship. In the aftermath of the crisis, both superpowers recognized the need to reduce the risk of nuclear conflict. In 1963, the United States and the Soviet Union signed the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, the first step in a series of arms control agreements designed to ease Cold War tensions.